Welcome back to Good Distinctions. I'm your host, Will Wright, and joining me today is Father Michael Brisson of the Legionnaires of Christ, and he is the author of Death in Black and White, a new novel from Ignatius Press. Father Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. I really enjoyed the book. But first, as I do with all my guests, I'd like you to just introduce yourself to us. Who are you?
Okay. My name is Father Michael Brisson. I am a priest of the Congregation of the Legionaries of Christ. I was born in Connecticut, South Windsor, joined the seminary at a young age of 18. Then have been, since it's an international order, I've been kind of all over the world since then. I started out in Connecticut, as I said, for like 3 months, and then I was sent to Mexico for 2 years, learned Spanish, learned how to eat tacos, good tacos. And then I was spent some time in New York studying, and then in Rome. And I was ordained in 2009. I worked in the New York area basically as a retreat master, as spiritual director, and worked with Regnum Christi, which is apostolic movement. And then eventually was put into more administrative roles as a sort of chief of staff of our provincial superior in the United States. And then more recently in 2020, I was elected to our general council, which is every major superior, every head of a congregation has a council. It's sort of like his board. So I'm on the board, and I also oversee priestly life for our congregation. So that means everything that has to do with helping our priests be happy, healthy, and holy. And so I try to foster initiatives that do that. And I also oversee our personnel assignments. So it's kind of like HR for priests, if you will. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great. Well, it seems like you've had a lot of experience in different areas, and that's always a good thing to draw from when you're writing a book like this. I'm going to try really hard during our conversation to not give away anything because, like I was saying before we started recording, I'm not one to pick up a fiction book and read it and enjoy it fully.
Okay.
There's a handful of books I like that are new. I love Lord of the Rings. I love anything Chesterton wrote, C.S. Lewis. Like that time period's probably my favorite. But as far as, I don't know, recent texts, I like Michael Crichton. I like stuff like that, like kind of sci-fi
Sure.
drama. But so I picked up the book, and I didn't have really any sort of expectations one way or another. I was just going to read it, see where it led me, and I was in by like page 1. I read it in about 2 or 3 sittings, and I just couldn't put it down. I had to put it down to go with my family occasionally.
Right.
But man, you did a great job with this book. It's gripping. It has heart. It's true. You want your stories to be true, right? So
right, exactly.
Even if it's fiction, it's absolutely true, and it's dramatic. It's got organized crime. It's got priestly life. You know, I worked for 7 years at a parish, and I absolutely felt like I was right back in parish life there for a minute. I mean, you got the inner dynamics of the parish office, the phone call from the vicar of priests and the priest sweating like, oh gosh, what is this? Like,
exactly.
It was perfect, and it wasn't heavy-handed, and man, I mean, great book. So, and just for those listening, it's called Death in Black and White from Ignatius Press, but I guess I'll start with this. What was the inspiration for this book? Like, why write a book? It seems like you've got your hands full with a lot of administrative tasks.
A great question. I wasn't planning on writing the book. I had always, so since I was a kid, I was always very creative. I loved, role-playing games. I wanted to make movies. I wanted to be a filmmaker. So that was always kind of there. And then I was always a writer. I loved short fiction. My teenage years, I would spend hours writing short fiction. I would start at 10 o'clock at night and work until 4 in the morning during the summer. Which, most kids, I don't know what they would be doing, and teenagers would be doing at that hour, but I was doing that. And so it was always there. And then I joined the seminary, and I kind of thought there was a lot of things I'd have to give up. Like I'd have to give up skiing, which is another passion of mine. I have to give up cinematography and writing and anything artistic because, we're priests, so we have to be like serious and, have just reserved and pray all the time, which turns out not to be the case. There's lots of opportunities to be creative, but mostly that's been found as outlet in preaching that I do, or retreats that I preach. So I use a lot of imagination in that, and that also takes up a lot of what someone termed psychic RAM. So during if for example I would have a Sunday homily, I need to be preparing that from Monday. I've got ideas kind of churning in the back of my mind, and then. And so everything's kind of relating to that. Well, once I was put in an administrative role, I didn't have those talks and Sunday homilies to prepare as much. I do still do a bit of that, but it's not like every single week, right? So I could use that sort of backspace in the back of my mind to start dreaming of ideas for a story. So that's there. The other thing is I was kind of challenged by two of my confreres. We were at dinner one night, and one of the fathers is an author. He's written several books, and he said, "Hey, so you write really well. Why don't you write a book?" I kind of hemmed and hawed, and I was like, "I don't know. I'll think about it." And so I'm back to eating my pork chops, and he kept insisting. And then the other priest was like, "Yeah, you should write. You have a gift." And that's where my conscience came in, and it was like, okay, if I've got a gift, I should be using it. And I'm not, at least not to that degree. But I'm not going to write a spiritual book because so much has been said. I haven't read enough yet. Yes, I've studied theology. I have a master's degree in philosophy. I've read a lot of theology or spiritual stuff, but I just don't feel like that's what God's calling me to do. And also, I've got a full-time role that I don't have extra time. So it has to be something that's going to keep me motivated. So I had the one day a week that I have a little bit of free time. I just started dabbling. The idea was to write a few vignettes of my life as a priest, or either stories like that I'd lived, because every priest has a million stories, because we just get thrown in these situations that are unbelievable. And either my story or friends' stories. And so I wrote one, and then I wrote a second one, and they turned out to be connected. And then they just kept going, and then it ended up being a novel. And then I had to go through it. I was at the same time learning a lot about fiction writing and the art of literature, of the art of fiction, of storytelling, which helped me hone that skill, which is applicable in lots of different ways, but particularly in writing fiction. And I've also been, a big reader. So I love fiction. I love literature. I love classics. Jane Austen, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Dickens, all of those. So, I just, and some modern stuff too. Anyway, so that's kind of a long answer to your short question, how I started. And yes.
Well, that's fascinating, and I'm glad you did, because you definitely have a gift for fiction writing. I write a lot. I mean, I write thousands of words at least a month. I don't know. I've slowed it down a little bit because I've done kind of like you said, when you have these homilies. Well, I've been preparing for classes because I teach undergrad as well as high school. So
Okay.
I've got all that churning in my head. So I've slowed it down, but I've tried writing fiction a few times, and I don't have it. It's not there.
Yeah.
Nonfiction, you got it. Different levels. It could be high academic or accessible, but fiction is not my thing. So it's fascinating. I wanted to ask you a little bit more technical question based on what you said. You said you were writing sort of these vignettes, and they all sort of came together. But what struck me about your story is that there was nothing sort of dangling. Every story was finished. It all fit together. So, I mean, at what point did you have to go, okay, this is turning into a full-length book. I need to make sure the thread works.
Yeah, great. So it was probably after, so I'd written the two stories. And so the one story was this elderly lady who I visited one time, and she ended up telling me her life story, which is pretty dramatic. She had married a guy after 6 years, had 4 kids, and then he ended up being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And then she ended up stayed committed to him back at a time when she could have put him in an institution, but she raised the 4 kids and helped her husband, and it was just an amazing story. So I wrote that up with all the the warmth that a story like that could have, and the drama. And then the next vignette was another story of a guy priest who had this experience. He was called one night late, to hear that someone of the others, I got a guy that needs last rites. And he's like, okay, well, just give me the hospital room or the house address, whatever. I'll go there. He goes, no, we'll pick you up. So he ends up picking him up, taking him to this farmhouse outside the city. This is not in New York. It's another city, East Coast. And the whole setup was like mafia. Like there's a guy at the door guarding the door, and he takes him upstairs, and it's this young guy, like probably, maybe early 20s, who was nervous as can be. And turns out he was there to hear his confession because they were going to knock him off. He had seen something, heard something, whatever, and he was a liability. And so they're giving him a chance to go to confession before they take him out. And it turns out that's an actual mafia ritual called the White Death. Now, I've never heard of that before anywhere else, but this priest told me, that I was there. He told me this is how it works. So I wrote that story, obviously totally fictionalized in New York. So when the priest that I'm writing about, this priest who's going to the upper room, but not in the city, and he opens the door, and who's there? It's the son of the old woman of the first story. And I was like, oh, this is actually connected. And that's when it really did. And then I started saying, okay, well, if I were in that situation, what would I do? Like, could I just hear the confession and leave? Or would I be like, oh, wait a minute, these guys are like doing this nasty stuff. I got to stop them. Or maybe, I don't know, call the police. But what if I call the police, then they'll know it was me. And then, then I'm putting other souls in jeopardy. And, so all these kind of, question marks. And then that's where kind of the tension and the conflict, which every story has a great conflict. So getting back to your technical question about, everything being connected. So in part, so there's a lot that's not in the book. So there are chapters that I wrote and are not there because they were irrelevant and didn't drive the plot forward. Every scene, every scene has to drive the plot forward. No character can be irrelevant. No secondary character can just be there. I mean, you can have a couple maybe that are just, a bartender who has, who's there, but you need everything kind of needs to be connected. And I thought that was very important. And it also is satisfying for the reader because they're like, oh, so that's how it plays in. And like, there was this thing that happened in the first act or the first part of the story, and then it shows up in the third part, and you're like, oh, so that's kind of fun as well. So it has to be as well entertaining. It can't just be all deep stuff.
No, it was really good. And you brought in the theological elements, I think, in a way that was perfectly done, that it wasn't preachy. It was something that it's there, it's present, but it's part of the story because obviously the protagonist is a priest who's incidentally trying to be a good priest, very imperfect as he is, as we all are, but he's trying to remain faithful to the vows that he took, including the seal of the confessional. I mean, it's all in there and it's all part of the plot, and it's all part of this, as you call it in the book, this Rubik's Cube to try to figure out. But then you add these elements like the feds trying to go to a Chick-fil-A on a Sunday. I was like, this is hilarious. So just these light little moments of like, okay, this is a real story. The other thing I noticed is you clearly like classic movies.
Yeah, probably not as much as the protagonist because that's kind of his thing, but I love classic movies.
Okay,
I love,
because he does.
Yeah. Oh, he does totally. Yeah, that's his thing. Yeah. You have to. I mean, I think characters to be interesting need to have a personality. They need to have things that they like. Their likes and what they hate and what they're addicted to. And it's like I'm kind of writing one now where he's addicted to coffee and he has to give up coffee. So that's kind of a leitmotif, which is banal and what have you. But it gives like three dimensions to the character. So in this case, he's a movie buff. He loves, and he's constantly seeing the world through these, like flashbacks to these movies he's seen, and that's kind of. And I think we do, like, pop people today that are, pop culture is so much part of us. Like, I mean, it's all around us: Netflix and Prime, Amazon Prime, all that stuff. People tend to like think in story, and they think in and they compare themselves to like characters in movies, and sometimes, or either aspirationally, like I wish I could be like that person, or I can't be like that person. I think good fiction does that, right? It shows us how to live, and it gives us frames of reference. So that's kind of what he's doing as well.
I also I find it ironic now knowing how administrative your role is, and seeing some of the administrative characters in here who are just awful. So that was kind of funny. Not that all administrators are bad, obviously. We need them. They're very important to the church.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a caricature there, which I think, I mean, it's also part of the fun of the book that I do paint some caricatures that are based in a bit in reality. Like we know people like that, and I think some people who are in administrative roles for a long time can just start to see the world, if especially if they're priests who are. I think Pope Francis talks a lot about this, about getting out and being with people, right? Because it's true. I mean, especially those of us who tend to be more introverted, we can get kind of just into our administrative world, and that's what life is. And we start to deal with even with people as if they're processes to be completed,
Hmm.
and that's a danger. So it's also kind of a warning. I don't want to be like that guy.
Well, and the characters were also, as you say, three-dimensional. They're complex. They're not all caricatures, especially the primary characters. Like, I'm thinking of the Monsignor. Like you introduce him
Yeah,
as sort of this crotchety old priest who's, he's no longer the pastor, so he's just being a jerk to the current pastor. But then by the end of the story, without giving anything away, like you find out he's actually not a bad guy, and he's actually had everybody's best interest in mind from the start. So it's this, but the way that you do it's very nuanced.
yeah. Thank you. I try to do that because people are neither black nor white, and we like to put people in boxes. We like to say this guy's good, this guy's bad. I remember when I was studying philosophy, it was typical you stick, all certain philosophers in the bad box. You have Nietzsche and Marx and etc. in the bad box, and you have Thomas Aquinas and Jacques Maritain in the good box, right? And okay, their thinking is yes, there's there, but no, I mean that's not how people are. People, the gravest sinners, and I've known some really bad sinners, also have taint of good, and oftentimes the sinners are doing their sin for good reasons, or maybe just pure weakness. But sometimes they're, and I think like good villains never think that what they're doing is wrong. They're in fiction,
Hmm.
they think what they're doing is good. It's at least good for them. If it's not good for society, it's good for them. And so they see that there's a reason why there's always a reason why they're doing things. So everybody should have character flaws because everyone does. Real people have character flaws. We all have our weaknesses, but they also have redeeming qualities as well. And so when you're I think when you're writing fiction, it's sort of like when you're editing photos, you want to turn up the contrast a bit, and you want some of those things to come out and be more present so you can see them. But that teaches us that not to take anyone for like put anyone in a box of good or bad. Everyone has the chance to redeem themselves, even if they seem to be the worst person in the world. If we see them that way, then that does damage to ourselves, to our own souls.
No, it's very important, and I can also relate to that from my work in a parish. Is you meet a lot of people. I think currently I'm working as a high school teacher, and you meet the students. Obviously, I've got a 300 something students in the school that I've met, and all my coworkers. But that's nothing compared to the parish where I'm interacting with thousands of people a year who are all sort of weird. Like we're all weird, but like they've got their quirks and they're in their home, right? It's their parish. So they all think that they want it to be this way. And the pastor says, no, we want it this way. And then you've got the inner workings of the parish staff and all of that. So it's this very strange place that I don't think you get in the working world. I don't think you get it in other community settings that are smaller. And people are very complex. The person who I butted heads with maybe in the first couple of years of my work in the parish turns out 3 years later to be one of my closest allies, so to speak. And like I never
Beautiful.
saw this coming. It's like, and that happens all the
Beautiful.
time. So it's
It
yeah,
does.
people are complex and strange and absolutely can be redeemed.
Oh yeah. Um, I spent some of my summers when I was in formation. So as a religious order, we live off of donations. I mean, we have a lot of schools and universities and stuff in other countries, and that in some countries that actually gives you revenue and helps you to support yourselves. But like especially in the United States, everything we do requires us to raise money. So in the summertime, uh, they would give me and another brother, we were brothers before we were priests, right? And they give us a list of people who had donated through the mail and with their name and their phone number and their address. And so we would go out and we'd call these people up and we would just go and visit them And to be able to go and just sit on a couch with a cup of coffee and listen to people's stories was so enriching. Like I learned so much about humanity, about people's. I put the value of my priesthood or my future priesthood at that time. Like it became very clear to me. Like these people really need to talk. They need Jesus. They need God in their lives, and they're looking to their priests. And the reason why they're supporting us is because they want priests and to be out there, bringing Christ to people, and just to hear like what they suffer with. How many parents of older children are torn apart because their children aren't going to mass anymore, and they're like, what did I do wrong, and why aren't they they faithful anymore, and to be able to console them and say you're not alone.
Yeah.
Or just to hear those stories helps really see the depth and the diversity of people out there, because every person has a very unique story, even if there's some commonalities between them. So if we can do that through fiction and get an eye into different lives, and I can share the experiences of other people through my imagination, I think that's helpful.
As you were speaking about these experiences with people, it reminded me of just how many people struggle with the fact that their children are no longer attending church or no longer practicing the faith. I mean, that was the norm rather than the exception. And what I always like to remind people, and so I'll mention this since we're recording for the sake of the listeners, is, in the liturgy for St. Monica's feast day, it says Augustine's conversion came about through her prayers and her tears. And
Yes.
it's one of the most beautiful lines, that you're not alone. And it took St. Monica a long time and a lot of prayer. But St. Augustine finally came around, and look what that led to,
Amen.
So definitely don't lose hope.
Well, that's it. And hope is, hope and humility are really what can get you through life. Love obviously is the chief virtue that we need to be striving for, and living in God is love. And right, all the virtues are, you need them, right? But I think hope and humility, those two, because if you have hope, you never give up, and believing in God, who's all powerful and all love, and the worst situation will somehow bring about a greater good. And so when this circumstance of parents who see their kids drifting off, God loves them more than they do. So if God loves them more than they do, then He's going to find a way. Obviously we all have free will, and that's, I think, especially as a priest, that's the biggest struggle, is to see people use their free will the wrong way or to reject God, and that does happen. We have to. There's a reason why there's a doctrine of hell, because people can have the ability to reject God. But again, God will reach out to every soul, in every way possible that they can respond. And that's why I really like the books of Graham Greene. He's a mid-20th century English author, part of the Oxford Renewal movement. Just Catholic in an Anglican country, and rather agnostic Anglican country at the time. And he was writing this idea that once you're baptized, there's this seed that's planted in a kind of a hook that's in your soul, and God, no matter how far you go away, He's still going to keep holding on to that hook and pulling you back. And all His stories speak to that, no matter how dark things get. And His stories, they get pretty dark, pretty, but they come back in the end. There's one story which is I won't say the title because I'll give it away. I'm going to give it away a little bit, but there's a character in this in the book that it ends up breaking every one of the 10 commandments, every single one, unwittingly. Oh, not unwittingly, but like he's a simple guy and just trying to do his. But he does one thing, and it leads to another thing, and leads to another thing, and he ends up breaking all 10 commandments. And at the end of the book, the priest, there's a priest in it, and he just says, you know what? At the same time, he loved. And there was a love there that might be his redemption. Because everyone's like, well, he's obviously going to hell. But no, not necessarily. Not necessarily. And I think that's the Christian and the Catholic worldview. Like, everything's redeemable. Everything's redeemable.
And in the book, you, I think you mentioned this at the beginning, maybe in the foreword or the somewhere near the beginning, that you're writing this in part for priests, to remember either priests. and to encourage them in their ministry. And that absolutely came through. I mean, by the end of the book, if you're a priest and you're reading this book and you get to the end and you're not shedding a tear, you're heartless. It's beautiful. I mean, at the very end, especially, I was like, okay, tears were coming down. It was just beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, so I dedicated it to priests. I think I forget exactly. I don't have the book with me right now, but I dedicated it saying something to the effect of, for priests, especially those who wonder if what they really do makes a difference or matters. And that was, and it's true, because I think a lot of priests, when we're first ordained, it's like miracle after miracle. Like, it's constant. I mean, it's like people come to confession and you end up saying things to guide them in confession. Like, where did I come up with that? It just happens. The Holy Spirit's using you, or puts you, like, the number of times I've heard confessions on flights or in airports or just random places, for a soul that was in need, has the courage to see the collar and come to the priest and ask for it, which takes a lot of guts, and just to be Jesus to them and listen to them and console them with Jesus' mercy. That in itself is a miracle. But the Eucharist that we celebrate every day is a miracle. I mean, Jesus coming down into the bread and wine and becoming present truly is a miracle. And then different things that he uses. But after a while, you gotta get used to living in a miracle, and you kind of it's like, oh yeah, it's another day in the job. And then you see all the people that reject, as I've said before, reject God's grace, or you reach out to them and they convert, or they start to convert, and then they fall away again, and you're like, and they're frustrated with themselves, and you're frustrated because you can't do anything for them, or not enough. You don't have a magic wand to make all their problems go away. You don't have a mirror to show them like what they're doing so they can see themselves and what you see. You wish that you had that, and you don't. So there's an element of frustration in that, which calls us back to hope, right? Calls us back to humility of, I'm not here to save the world. I'm here to help Jesus do that, right? He's going to use me and save maybe one soul. And I think that's part of the point of the book, is that his priesthood was really worth it if it was for that one soul that gets saved. And I mean, and I think that's the attitude. So again, priests can get into discouraging moments and feel like no matter how hard they work and how many sleepless nights there are, they're just not able to keep up with all the need. And so let's take a step back and realize that it's Jesus who's going to save the world, and then I'll just help him the best I can, and be satisfied with that. Be humble enough to be, okay, I did my part, whatever it was.
Well, it's especially poignant today when you've got a pastor of a parish of 5,000 families, and he's got one retired priest and an associate who maybe is active or not, depending. That's so tough. I mean, because you want to do everything, but you can't.
Yep.
And so I've seen priests react in different ways. I've seen them completely burn out and have to take a 6-month sabbatical. I've seen them withdraw from everyone and everything. I've seen them, every human response imaginable. And it's so disheartening to see, but it's understandable. But I think what you're offering here is the way out, that idea of hope and humility, that this isn't all on me. I'm meant to be active in my ministry, which, as Vatican II puts so clearly, is to sanctify the people. I need to sanctify the people, whatever that means, whatever's right in front of me, I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to go home and I'm going to sleep, and maybe get woken up in the middle of the night and go do the sick call, and then come back home, get more sleep if possible. Because it's so easy for anyone, priest or not, to be isolated today, but especially for priests. That's one of the things that I think the church needs to wrap their mind around again, is for those who are diocesan priests, especially, to have true community. Not just these rectories that are isolated, but maybe have like a priest home for a deanery, if that's possible. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, yeah, that's
community.
a big, it's a big topic. So I live in community. I'm a religious priest, so I have that benefit. But community takes work, and it takes you gotta give of yourself, and and when you're giving yourself all day to your parish, then to come home, you kind of want to just like, all right, leave me alone. I want to just kind of veg and like disappear. And nope, you got it's in like any father, right? Any husband. This guy, he goes to work all day and then he comes home and that's you're not off. You gotta be dad. You gotta play with the kids. And you gotta so that's life. It's vocation, right? That's what we're called to. But I'm not saying that that's a bad idea to have. I think you're right. It's absolutely true that priests can get isolated, and you can be isolated. Like even priests that live in community can get isolated, and it's a choice. So it's a call, I think, for all of us to support our brothers and to serve by going out and like giving of myself to my brother, so that I will receive that reciprocally. Because if I give, he'll give, and we'll both be supporting each other, just like in a good, healthy family. Spouses support each other, and they're a team, and they're fighting together, and they're trying to do to raise their family as a team. We got to do the same thing in priestly life. Now, I know a lot of priests that have great priestly friendships and fraternal friendships, and they look for it, and they have their night where they just go with their priest friends and they just spend that time with them, or they have prayer groups that they're part of, or they have healthy relationship with good solid Catholic families, where they who are a support to them. We all need friends, and we all need that support. So the danger of isolation is absolutely there, and one of the biggest dangers for grace. But the opportunities should also be there.
Well, and for the lay people listening, if you complain to your priest every day, knock it off. That would be my first, thing to say. And remember that in the parish, the priest is the father, not just in title, but like there's a real sense of fatherly care, spiritual fatherhood over the parish that he's been entrusted. So honor your father and give some respect. It doesn't mean priests are right all the time. Obviously, they're not. And I've seen both sides of that as a layperson in the pew and as someone who works on the parish staff. Even the best pastor isn't right all the time. But nonetheless, we still need to approach people with respect. It's one of the things, I'll bring this back to the book. You do a really good job of showing how priests have this way, getting people to drop down their guard and give their whole life story within 2 sentences. I've seen this. And it's, I imagine, because obviously I'm not a priest, but I imagine that could be absolutely exhausting if you're not approaching it with humility and hope.
It can be. It's part of to carry other people's burdens is hard. And obviously there are different personalities, right? So there's some that are less empathetic and, don't really get emotionally involved, or it's very hard for them to get emotionally involved. And so, it's less of a burden, or they're able to take it and just, others, they have, soft hearts, and they're like, oh, I feel for you so much, and I wish I could do something. And it's like, and they carry it. And then just the empathy is always draining. I think if you're emoting with someone, then that's always going to be draining. At the same time, it's also rewarding, because you know that you're there for somebody, and it's in a moment where they need it. And sometimes it can be annoying, especially when you have to go somewhere and you're like, I got like, I have an appointment, I need to go. And someone wants to just unload on you, and they're like, and you have to like stop yourself. Like, okay, what's the most important thing here? This person is in front of me, or whatever thing I have going on. And sometimes it's not clear distinction, so setting proper boundaries as well. I think everybody needs to learn how to do that, set boundaries. So like you were saying, the whole idea of, you need to sleep. Every priest, priests are great, especially the zealous ones will burn the candle at both ends. If you have 10 more hours, even if God gave you 10 more hours a day, you'd still just use all those up and wouldn't finish. You wouldn't get to everybody. So you just gotta do what you can in the time that you have. And what you don't accomplish, Leave that in God's hands.
Well, you bring up the fact that different priests have different temperaments, and it's really important to understand, as well as whether you're in the office setting or you're in a school, or you're a priest or you're living in real community, like whatever it might be, everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. So use that, play to that. One parish manager that I interacted with, I didn't work with him. He had this big dry erase board and he had everything that he needed to get done on it. And I walked in and I looked at it. I was like, good Lord, man, like this is impossible. How are you going to get all this crap done? And he was like, oh, I'm not. I get as much of it done today as I can. And then I go home at 5 and I come back and start again. And I was like, now, granted, this was one of the worst parish managers I've ever met. Just like he was gone within 2 months. But I think that was actually pretty intelligent. That was pretty wise, that aspect. Because I know I've used that, like learning how to prioritize things properly, play to strengths, and let it go and go home. That's tough to learn.
It is. The more people, it depends on the personality, but the more people are depending on you for something, you hate to let them down. And so if one of those items is going to let someone down, it's hard to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Or if you have your own, if your personality is more objective, goal oriented, and you're trying to get to a certain objective and get the parish to a certain place, whatever. And you know that some of those items are crucial to do that, so you're going to spend the extra time because you want to achieve that. In both cases, it's the answer is humility. It's like, okay, you can only do so much. Yeah, so it's
challenging. Humility paired with magnanimity, right? Like you got to find the people around you who you can delegate to.
Agreed, and trust that even if they don't do it the way you would do it or perfectly, which I think is always that's for some of us. We have a hard time delegating because it's they're just not going to do it right. I just know they're not going to do it right. Like no, it's fine. It doesn't do it your way. But yeah.
Well, Father, it's been a great conversation. I love the book. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the listeners? Other than, I'm going to go ahead and say everyone should go buy the book. Ignatius Press, Death in Black and White, a novel by Father Michael Brisson. Seriously, buy this book, read it, love it, give it to your friends and family. Christmas is still a ways away, but maybe order 20 copies and just have them ready for gifts.
Oh, yeah, there you go. And it's also it's a good beach read.
It is. It was a good beach read. So any final thoughts?
I think we covered a lot of the message. I think what I'm hoping people will get out of the book is a sense of hope, a sense of God's providence and God's mercy, so that you will not be preached to. This is not a book that's going to preach to anyone. It just goes through someone's life, and all things that happen to him. The lessons speak for the life speaks for itself. And I think I hope people enjoy it. I hope it's a little bit of a healthy escape for those who need a healthy escape, and that they be edified by it. So yeah, that's all.
Amen. Well, thank you. And for those listening, if you would go to gooddistinctions.com to subscribe for free and check out all the other interviews that I've had and other articles I've put out, and go and buy Death in Black and White by Father Michael Brisson. Father, thank you so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Will. God bless you.